What up, random rockers? Finally, I've come back to talk 21 albums thus far. Minus one that I'm also going to leave on the cutting room floor for some reasons. In fact, I'll also simultaneously through this within a couple albums on the docket that will be related to a particular album that's celebrating its 20th anniversary that I will be talking about because it's worth it. You'll figure it out as I hint at it consistently through those albums I'll talk about. But we will get to that soon. But for now, we start with an album number one from a certain particular band coming out this year, one of which was a delay from 2020's bull crap. This one having been because, well, the band was bored in 2020. Yes, that album is Weezer's OK Human. This album, and despite what the title of the album tells you, it is a brewpop record, not a Radiohead rip-off album. However, the quality of this record, luckily in Weezer's case, is a good one. Plus, finding out that realizing the producer of this record did White Album recently, and it's probably the only living producer that is involved in any good albums that is of recent memory and of note, that has still alive, they can still probably look towards. Unless he helped them with recent bad albums, then yikes. But regardless, for the first time ever, we can finally, that's what's going to make it this. I feel like this album's existence was apparently something that was talked about that I had no idea about because I don't keep up with their interviews, and that's my own fault. But because so many other much music out there, some I am able to, some I'm not. Just depends on how invested I am in them. And Weezer, this is something I've been invested in, and even though I didn't show up for that, but I was busy doing a review at the time that they decided to show up for concert, and have Weezer riding a freaking crowd surfing with a boat. That freaking boat, which was insane. I missed out on that. At least they can pull a concert. That's good on them. They're good boys. It's just a shame. It's just a shame they've been having to, they finally made it up to us and then just. But I also blame Crush management a little bit because some of within the previous albums, when what they should have done was just cherry pick the best aspects of those other of what those two actual albums were. Released it to get as the actual Black Album, and they might have made something good. Look up Viral Rack's redacted of said Black Album and thank me later. Especially Viral Rack from he's sending some small amount of people to you. But anyways, which I doubt is going to happen. But wishful thinking, just as much as it was wishful thinking, but not beyond wishful thinking. Weezer did it. Weezer fucking did give us a good record. I just wish I cared enough, man. I liked it, but I'm not going back to it as much. I mean, it was nice when I listened to it when I was doing grocery shopping. I mean, I guess it works for that. I guess it is a little grocery core, but not in a bad, at least not in as bad a way as the term grocery core usually tends to be. So that's that, I guess. But I mean, Bird Pop, what do you expect? I mean, I would have liked it if they went a little more Death Cab for Cutie. They had the potential to do that, like the good Death Cab for Cutie. You know what I mean? And I think Death Cab for Cutie kind of might be influenced by Weezer in a way. So it would make sense if they did take some cues, or at least some good cues. You know what I mean? If they do decide to continue more in this vein, but want to bring a little bit more. And plus, it was all analog, so that made it even better to know that. And I think because they went all analog, it had something to do with why the production comes off a little bit better, I guess, than what White Album's does. Not that the ideas that were executed, not that album's still pretty solid, if not damn good for what it was anyway. So, which was nice that it worked out. And most of it's dealing with a lot of quarantine stuff, so it's just nice to know that Weezer's just polarizing, and right now between this and what I've already heard from Van Weezer, I'm going to at least like that record for what it is. but it's meant to be, you know, set your 70s hard rockin' kind of a thing in a way that's very much maladroit with some Blue Album things here and there. Maladroit, like metallic meatiness with certain other things here and there. But anyways, this album, like I said, it's good. Still looking forward to Van Weezer regardless, because I already know that album's going to be good anyways. But hopefully it is. And I just hope that people don't like decide to steer away from it all of a sudden for some reason after finally Weezer doing an album where they're not sounding exactly like something you'd expect from them in a way that's actually good and works for them. Given the last record, it makes sense as a progression, even though we already know the band kind of went back to their usual roots in power pop-ish, but in a way that felt more 70s hard rock. That works in their favor. And then if they find a way to balance those two out together in a way, what they've done with these two records, they can make at least one other solid record and consistency, and show some form of consistency, and the ratio of bad over good Weezer is more good than bad. I think I'll be, and that's it for them. I think we'll be happy for the most part. But yeah, I understand if some people feel we need to move on. But anyways, that's Weezer in a nutshell. But regardless, I look forward to Van Weezer. Hopefully you all still are. But that's my thoughts there. And yeah, this is definitely one of the better albums that have come out for the year, for sure. That thumbs up Weezer. Hopefully I can give it one of the horns for Van Weezer. Despite it's seeming like it could see a backtrack, but it's not really. It's just more whether or not, let's just hope that it wasn't, that maybe they should have released it in 2020 when you did, because of what you've shown here. I don't know. We'll see what happens when it comes out. I can't wait to talk about that one. Hopefully as a separate review instead of what I'm doing here with OK Human. But I had to do catch up. This is the only way I could do it. Here you go. Steven Wilson, The Future Bites. And as you heard from that bass line, this would be now for this man, known famously for his time in groups like Porcupine Tree, more so Porcupine Tree specifically, but he's done other groups such as No Man, which he seems to take more from on this project, and apparently had recently released a project last year that kind of flew under my radar. But then again, given it's a more electronic style of a project, I wasn't really that keen to be interested in it. But it seemed he was like, at this point, he was planning on going from a more progressive rock to just progressive pop act, and he's doing so still, of where he left off from To the Bone, but is focused more on what he did on that production wise, it seems, while still being focused on what he's done on No Man. The thing is this out, given that this was like what Weezer is going to be dealing with Van Weezer, which is why I'm worried, does this album live up to that? I get some people's complaints, yet the only person, once again, somehow Fantano, it took this record for Fantano to be on board with Steven Wilson for once, which just baffles me. Just baffles me at this point. But fucking whatever. Just no, Steven Wilson, he's basically the king of prog at this point because of his involvement in many projects. In fact, having produced one of the best Opeth records. Speaking of Opeth, we'll get to that other thing I'm going to talk about in a minute. This album, as you heard it from that bass line, and you could tell from this track, I mean, the album itself, starting off, having started off with tracks like Unself Into Self, and it's mostly pretty short and clearly more progressive pop oriented, with the longest track essentially not even being like slightly under 10 minutes. And that's in Personal Shopper, with the shortest tracks essentially being between your intro and outro, essentially. And it's in Personal Shopper, with the shortest tracks essentially being between your intro and outro, essentially. And it's in Personal Shopper, with the shortest tracks essentially being between your intro and outro, essentially. And it's in Personal Shopper, with the shortest tracks essentially being between your intro and outro, essentially. Actually, mostly a lot of stuff, including some elements about the production that comes off very much like the recent, the latest Radiohead record. He's had an obsession with them since the Bends, apparently. So, Bends and had utilized that when he did decide to go progressive pop with Porcupine Tree for a little bit, for a couple of albums, until he decided to further experiment with that, with Blackfield, with a project known as Blackfield, so that which allowed him to explore the more metal tendencies he started to flirt a little bit with, having produced that specific Opeth record known as Blackwater Park. Yes, I'll be talking about that one. Ooh. And yeah, and he had been doing a few solo records here and there, produced some other albums for Opeth, and his stuff he did in the 2000s post, since Lightbulb Sun has been probably I've had more fun with that era of the band, even if it has its low moments in places, but they're still fine, solid records at the very least. I just have yet to tell you about their 90s works, though, aside from maybe Stupid Dream. But regardless, at least Porcupine Tree you should check out for sure. And definitely, my exposure to them has been since Hand Cannot Erase with Steven Wilson. And even, it's gotten to a point where I've liked the 4.5 EP even more than what I did with Hand Cannot Erase eventually. And then eventually I started to enjoy what To The Bone was. It just had to be a grower, and it had enough time in the year to do so. I don't know if I could say that about this record, but all I can say is I had to do what I did for Tool's Fear Inoculum, lower my expectations in the sense that for that record, as long as it's better than 2,000 Days, I'll be happy. That's what happened here. In the case of this record, despite the wait we had for it, given quarantine, as long as this record's better than his first album, Insurgents, I'll be happy. And that's what happened for me. I would rather recommend you their previous two albums, yet alone that 4.5 EP, when it comes to Steven's solo works. And definitely his stuff with Porcupine Tree over this. That being said, it's still worth your time. If this is somehow your first exposure to him, you do like what you hear, but you want something else more prog rock sounding, or at least more involved in that, as opposed to the more electronic side of him, and even the more metal side of him, yeah, definitely Porcupine Tree. So, Tree and the stuff he's produced and collaborated on with Opeth, essentially, except for Heritage. That. But anyways, yeah, that's my recommendation. Is just the album's just, I guess, kind of a thumbs up, more like kind of mixed bag sort of thing for me. But it's not. But it's more. I'm more leaning in the positive than the negative side that most people tend to want to go off of. I'm slightly weirdly agreeing with Fantano, so sadly enough. But anyways, moving on. Soen Imperial. This would be album number, for this one, I'm trying to keep the track of the numbers, but this is, for me, my at least my experience, this is the third album I've dealt with from them, but it's not album number 3. This album, for me, this follows up the previous ones, Lakaya, and I don't know why I'm blanking on the last album's name, and I feel awful in doing so. But I liked that album, and it held us over till Filler Inoculum became a thing, and kind of, and that's the thing about this band, is that at this point in their career, since Lakaya mostly, not sure on their previous ones, but this band is essentially what we've come to expect from Tool since Lateralis kind of stuff. However, they're more of a Swedish version of it, but more in alla via the, like I had mentioned about Porcupine Tree's more metal tendencies since when Steven had worked on Blackwater Park. It's more so basically the In Absentia, which I have a review for. Look it up, check it out. It's a good record. In Absentia. Which is good, and everything he's done up until the incident is what you should It's definitely, and if you, it's more in that vein, which was essentially him taking the Tool, the essence of what is the anima Tool element of things, with more Pink Floyd and King Crimson tendencies, especially when King Crimson decided to tackle the sound itself, more so or less, and perfecting going off of that, I guess. Lateralis was, I'm guessing. I've yet to hear that King Crimson record, to be honest with you. So, King Crimson shills, calm down. I might eventually, when I'm done trying to deal with new music and done with that in general and just stick with classics. Who knows when that'll be. Or if I'll bother to do that as much. But the thing about this Soen record, it was more the fact that they got us by for as long as Tool's absence was in between those albums of 10,000 Days and Fear Inoculum for me. Or at least among the many bands that were able to pull off Tool in a way that was satisfying and held you over when you needed to. Except more Swedish, and you could tell that the Swedish element in his accent in a way that's similar to Michael Eckerfeldt's cleans. It's more that kind of operatic styling of sorts between Maynard's cleans and Eckerfeldt's blended together in a perfect way. And this guy can possibly sing the phone book in his way of Swedish, both in his native tongue and in English, the way he goes off on this. And he definitely remains one of the many highlights of this band, besides drummer Martin Lopez, who was a member at the time of Blackwater Park and God knows when, before or after, of Opeth. So it makes sense that his involvement in this had a part in his work with the band around that point and what he learned from Steven, and applying those aspects of his time in Opeth and from what Steven's done, and brought that together here in a package that is the closest thing to being a Swedish Tool you can get. And with maybe some Meshuggah-ish Genty tendencies more so this time around. With tracks, and like the first track here, Lumerian was a great opening choice for this record for sure. I think Illusion might have been one of the tracks, but Antagonist, I think, was one of the is among the softer type tracks that honestly helps in this band. This band very, very much progressive alt metal, similar to Tool's particular alt rock style, but with more progressive rock tendencies of King Crimson, and as expected, but and then some, a lot more of Opeth's particular sense of jazz theory going on here. And if you've liked what they've done thus far, you'll still like this record. At this point, for those who wanted more out of Opeth, given the recent stuff since Heritage, and it's still not that style of is being too straight up prog to do something, and not metal enough in a way, while also kind of catering to what people were hoping would be a nice little, and since Steven Wilson's not bringing back Porcupine Tree, yet alone in the state he had left it, or at least what good state was left of it, even though it went out on a whimper with the incident. But regardless, I think you'll like this record if you've liked the said bands I have mentioned. So, and I still like this record. I do think its theme does get a little monotonous. I think they mean well, but it just doesn't work out as well as I think they wanted to intentionally say. So, but anyways, album-wise, I mean, that's how good this album is. Definitely still rocks. It's definitely still a good listening experience, and I'm still willing to come back to them and still check them out. Definitely, even though I think the upcoming album that will be next after this, I probably won't be checking out as much. But this leads me. But again, like I said, I'll probably be talking about Blackwater Park Opeth and probably reference these albums again in that review, regardless. And now we're going to talk about an album that came out as a sort of a surprise, but the bigger surprise was what it actually was that the band never really promoted. And this album is Loathe, The Things They Believe. This is the follow-up, having come out literally a year after its initial release date of its last album, find it here. Dagnabbit. Where'd it go? There it is. The album being called And I Let It In, and it took everything of last year. I've talked about it in past before. And yeah, I was, given what was talked about, especially with some jazz ideas, I was expecting, I guess, something that you guys should not expect from this record at all. And you probably heard about it in and of itself, and that's the fact that this album, I'm going to say it, with the caveat, this album kind of rocks. That being said, it's not, don't go in thinking it's part 2 with jazz instrumentation. In a Tesseract kind of way. Which they do end things sort of in that way, because they do use a trumpet, but it's not the thing that ends the record. Gerd has its last notes, as opposed to whatever with the said other albums. But, this is an ambient record, basically. This is not a ambient metalcore record, I'll tell you that. But they're further exploring the more ambient, dark wave, all those more electronic side of themselves. Cells that they were bringing forth more so on that last record, and this one is damn good for being just what it is. And it's definitely good to relax to as well, and some ambient records should. And it has its dark wavy moments, but they don't stay around too long. They explore this sound more, and it works in the band's favor. The real question is, are we going to get more of this? And the band just kind of become an ambient band? Or is this them saying, we've explored all we need to explore with this particular part of the sound that we've had, and we're going to move on, continue our metalcore sound, just bring in some new idea sounds in on top of that, and then separate that out and move on into this other thing. I don't know what the plan is for Loathe, but or are they just going to cave and just decide, well, we're going to give you the part 2 you kind of wanted, and do what we were kind of doing on this thing and make it coming together, and hopefully it works. I don't know what they're going to do. It just leaves me wondering and guessing and all, but all I know is that this is damn good as an ambient thing, and technically it's out of my jurisdiction, but fuck it, I'll recommend it to you. If you like your ambient stuff, I guess this definitely sounds good to me. Maybe you could do better, but I don't know. Straight up ambient music is not usually my thing. But just a good recommendation. Loathe still killing it, just in a different way than what was initially expected. Moving on to an album from a band that I wasn't sure if they were going to be able to pull off, but it seems they did. Foo Fighters, Medicine at Midnight. This is album, number... What's their third album since the long-ass hiatus they made in between Echo, Silence, Patience, Grace, and that comeback record they made, Wasting Light. They've yet to reach, but you could tell something was off at moments, but not really. Still felt like the band was just firing all cylinders, now having had 6 members at that point. They've expanded a lot more, but I don't know sometimes if that's always a good thing. Sometimes I'd happen to switch for it too. Another band that's been comparable and blah, 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 blah. But yeah, Medicine at Midnight. Unfortunately, the first single, which is the second track, was a bit of an uh-oh. But I understood why they chose that song, but it wasn't something to get people excited, you know. But then they followed that up as a single with the tracks like Medicine at Midnight. Not Medicine at Midnight, no Son of Mine. That was a great follow-up, which they started off the new year with, by the way. Which was a smart move on their part as well, but simultaneously kind of pissing people off, like, why didn't you do this at the show and kick ass? Because they felt like, because of the incident with the elections and everything, they didn't feel like, I guess, they felt like just being somber and stuff. But Shame feels like you could have put that music into the background of the one Game of Thrones scene and you get the same effect. Ugh. But I liked this album. I mean, Aside from Shame winds up not being the worst track on the album, believe it or not. Of the singles, sure, but not the worst track. Worst track is on it. Sadly, it's 9 tracks here, but what it is pretty good. And Chasing Birds kind of reminds me of Disenchanted Lullabies. But anyways, other than that, every other track has been fucking amazing on this thing. And it's lived up to being on the heavier side that the band was talking about. Shame's still one of the weaker ones, but it works a lot better now when it's in the context as opposed to on its own. Plus, the chorus was probably the best thing on it, but it still wasn't enough, really, to being a good track, necessarily, because it didn't do a whole lot. But the opening track, which Making a Fire, what a great way to open at least the album. Cloud Spotter, a lot of people are hyping up a lot, but I feel like it's overhyped. It's damn good, but it's not the singles that we got out of Waiting on a War and Medicine at Midnight. Heck, I'm actually willing to say Holding Poison, I'd say should be more talked about, really. Though I can see how Cloud Spotter can kind of be an anthemic thing, but not nearly to the extent that people might have at. And Waiting on a War is very much a build-up track in a similar sense to Let It Die. In a good way, of course. Love Dies Young is definitely a nice track to end this record on, you know. So, but overall, it's definitely one of the better side of the Foo Fighters catalog, and is definitely gonna probably be making the year-end list for sure. Yeah, Foo Fighters finally, and this is the album I think it rocks. It's the album I think we should have gotten for Concrete and Gold instead. Heck, in fact, you could have just, instead of having what we would have had for Concrete and Gold, they should have just did what with this record, and then it took a couple of tracks out with Shame and Chasing Birds, and then put those 2 tracks in there, and then did the rest of it, and I think we'd have had a great album. But that's a great and a legitimately heavy record, and that's just me. But anyways, that's my weird ass redacted. But yeah, and you're endless contender for sure on the higher end, as well on with OK Human, and a couple. But I wouldn't say it's going to be as high as these next couple records, even though one of them's technically more of an EP. But I'm willing to say screw it with this one, like I did with Van Camino, which apparently I just listened to the new single, which it's fine. It's a little too much on the poppier side, but yet they do enough other stuff that it makes up for it. But yeah, except for it, just a small little recommendation that has nothing to do with what's going on here. But moving on to Copper Wasp by Night Versus. This EP, it's straight up mostly an instrumental thing. It's a group that had apparently lost their singer, decided to make a comeback through this single thing, and where each track which are pretty short tracks for the most part, including this track, Copper Wasp, Vice Wave, and Vanta Blonde are the only songs on this thing. It's technically supposed to be a single, but I think it's really more of an EP, really. And these tracks, all the instrumentation is solid straight up. And there are some like vocal cadence things, but for the most part, this is sort of a post-rock alternative metal type record. And there are moments, especially on the beginning of Vanta Blonde, that's very much has the tribal elements of Tool. And I do get similar vibes in that way of them, but I've also got similar vibes of other bands that have been more in that progressive, instrumental progressive rock metal style. More, or at least more so the Smash Brothers-ish style, but I do get some elements of some more uniqueness to this band in a certain kind of way. But I'd say I definitely would say check these guys out for sure. Air TV put them on my radar through his Road channel and gave this thing a 5 out of 5. So I definitely had to check, and given everything he said that sounded like it was up my alley anyway, I had to check it out, and I was enjoying it. I don't know, I feel like I'm being spoiled by intervals though, but it's still damn good. It rocks. could almost borderline masterclass. I don't know if this is a hint, given it's kind of centered single AP. Who knows if this band's going to do this in a full-length form. So, which will determine whether or not I'm going to actually count this on the as a release or not, or if I will have to, depending on if they do full length with these tracks on it and the rest of the album doesn't compare to this. I don't know, but we shall see. We shall see. Moving on to the final and last album. Finally. You heard it. Earth is a Black Hole by Teenagerists. Their second studio album. I even had a chance to say, screw it, since it's only their second. Screw it. I'm going to listen to their first record, which is Chrome Neon Jesus. And, or at least I decided to listen to this album first instead of going to Chrome Neon Jesus first, because it might have actually been a good idea. And yet somehow I seem to find myself, compared to Chrome Neon Jesus, coming back to this one more. Weirdly enough. Like, it has its hooks in me. Then the moment you hear this intro squeeze, before going into Taste of Gasoline, which I understand some people had heard people had issues with this single, but it's fine here, and I like New Emotion for what it is. There's Yellow Belly, Silver Spoon's good, fine. I liked Wear You Down. And it's a good 10-track listen. Still is a little on the softer side, but it works fine too. I like all these tracks have a hook to me, man. It's way more on the poppier. Like, this is a band that has been known to be part of that grunge revival scene, while also still kind of mixing in more 90s alternative essence with also adding shoegaze. And they were that in the first record, and this one they're branching out, adding more poppier, more pop rock aspects. Not alt pop. Not the alt pop genre of this decade per se, even though there is some essence of that production on this thing, just to make sense for some of the more poppier rock essences found on a lot of these tracks, and a lot of the hooks on here. It's like, Earth is a Black Hole is great. I love the title track has a great is this the sign of the times? Where do we go when the river runs dry? I mean, there's also like a good little video where I think the one guitarist is showing both the rhythm and lead parts, and you're still enjoying the song and you're learning the song, so you could check that out. I even checked it out through here on the YouTube Music thing app. But yeah, this album, if you like your grunge, shoegaze, and just 90s alternative in general, there are some elements that remind me of some certain more post-collective soul, post-grunge era stuff, some post-Britpoppy sprinkles of like the bends, or at least the more accessible elements of the bends, or that other bands were copying and pasting a little bit in that post-Britpop scene a little bit, that were Britpop-esque acts that were taking more American sounds, and also other stuff. And yeah, overall, this fucking album just rocks, and right now it's kind of the one that's stuck in my head, or at least it has hooks of some most songs that I keep wanting to go, my brain keeps wanting to go back to the most of this year. Even though there are a lot of people that want to like put this album, put the sophomore something like ARTV did, but I actually wound up thinking this is a damn good album, and it's still hooking me in. And Sophomore Slump, this is not to me at all. I highly recommend this to anybody, even if you have that's into some harder stuff, but wants it's a little bit of a softer side to them as well. It's gotten to the point where they started to add some emo pop elements. There's some Jawbreaker and some Sunny Day in there, and there's some of that good 2000s emo pop too, of the Jimmy World variety, all of the Bleed American Futures element to it that I dig, and even the stuff since the comeback that I dig. Especially with Earth is a Black Hole, the title track here. A lot of people loved it and were spoiled just listening to singles. I didn't get a chance to do it, and I was able to just listen to this album for what it is, and I love it for what it is. It's gonna, despite what everyone else will tell you, it's high on my list, and I highly recommend it. Please check this thing out. please check this thing out. What did you guys think of all these albums? Well, all these albums from what did you think of the new Weezer? Of all these albums I talked about, where are you looking forward to listening to any of them at all? Leave a comment below, let me know. Like links below to my Facebook page, like and follow me there. Also I have stereo. I don't know when I'm going to post podcast things. Eventually it'll happen. I have a link to that as well. There's also a link to like the Smash Cancer Fund on, I'm hoping it's still up, on GoFundMe. I also have hopefully it works. But I also have some other things you need to check out. And also, always hit the subscribe button, click that notification bell. If you like this video, rock that like button with thrust if you must, and make sure you click all on the notifications as well, on that notification bell. And as always, guys, keep it random, keep it real, keep it rocking, and I'll see you in the next video, whichever that may be, whether I'm going to be talking Schmodown, or maybe a certain classic album that I've already hinted at said I was going to do. We'll see when that actually happens. Given how life likes to throw curveballs at me. But anyways, take care, y'all.